Hello, welcome everyone to this fifth episode of BandWit, the monthly show you never knew you needed about ethics, technology, and the digital world. I am, as usual, Gabriel Olivero, and I'm delighted, as usual, to be your bioethical host today. Today we have another hour-long episode about the right to repair movement. But who's this? Who's on my side today, you ask? That's right, the invisible co-creator who usually lurks behind the screen, the one who clicks like a madman to make the show look so good and run as smoothly as it does. Denis Luchyshyn is with me as the co-host today. So who's covering for you, Denis? Not the Russian hacker from last time, I hope. I already was looking for a line work.
No. Lucky for us, I don't know if you heard the news, but Slavic cloning technology has made great leaps and bounds over the last few years. So we made a duplicate. He's behind the scenes, our invisible scientific wonder of a producer. Today is Valentin Kravchenko, so maybe you've heard of him.
Doesn't ring a bell, but he sounds like an interesting fellow. I hope you introduce me to him. So Denis, I personally know how much the right to repair movement strikes high on your personal value systems, and I'm glad you're joining me on screen today. So I'm going to address the first question of the show to you today. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
So, to give context to the audience, can you explain what exactly is the right to repair movement and why and how it became so important to you?
Yeah, so the goal of the right to repair movement in a nutshell is looking to protect the rights of consumers who want to do their own diagnostics, do their own repairs, without being locked into services provided by the manufacturer. And that means providing the tools, software, manuals, and instructions to be able to do your own repairs, and also have accessibility to the parts that are going to be necessary in order to repair your own items, the devices, appliances, all those types of things. To me, this movement is really, really important. It's really, I love to repair things. It means a lot to me to have that great sense of autonomy and pride to be able to fix my own things.
Not pride and accomplishment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fixed a ton of different stuff, like everything from antique cars, modern cars, washing machine, my espresso machine that I have at home. And last year, my girlfriend and I even tackled the project of doing the entire roof on our house. So it's to give you an example of the type of projects we tackle, and also honestly, the way I look at it is, it's good for the environment too, because making sure that we keep things out of landfill is extremely important, and that's one of the ways we can do our part.
Yeah, and you know what? I totally get you. I'm quite the handy woman myself. Once I repair a hole in this mittens, oh yeah, and I know you think it's not that big of a deal and there's no mechanic of parts involved, but hey, the way I talked about it for days, you'd think I fixed global warming, but truthfully, I just fixed my hand warming. So anyway, it's obvious to me that we have a very loaded and insightful episode today. So let's not wait any longer. And dear Valentine in the dark, in the shadow, please bring up our guests on screen so we can start this up.
Hi, Liz. Hi, Anthony.
Hi there.
Hello. So as our academic guests, we have Anthony Rosborough, PhD candidate to the European University Institute, and Elizabeth Chamberlain, Director of Sustainability at iFixit. So hello, Anthony, and hello, Elizabeth. We're so happy to have you here. And for our audience, can you just introduce yourself real quick? Tell us a bit about you, your main interests, what is your field expertise, what keeps you awake at night, and please answer the simple question. As a consumer, what was your worst experience regarding your own right to repair? So I'll let Liz go first if you want.
Sure. So I'm Liz Chamberlain. I'm iFixit's Director of Sustainability. For anybody who doesn't know iFixit, we're basically the Wikipedia of repair manuals. We have over 80,000 repair guides for how to fix everything from your toaster to your tractor and everything in between. And my personal worst experience regarding right to repair, I have an iPhone 7. This is actually my third iPhone 7. I bought my first in 2017. In 2019, the battery started to decline, which is it's normal. Lithium-ion batteries last about 400 cycles. I had Apple Care, so I took it into the Apple store and asked for a battery replacement. In an iPhone, to get to the battery, first you have to take the display off. And that's not just one step. It's 11 steps in our iFixit guide for getting the display off. We've got 4 separate warnings about fragile ribbon cables that you can accidentally damage as you do this. First of all, that's crazy. Batteries are consumables. It's normal to replace your battery a couple of times. Devices shouldn't be designed like this. And of course, the Apple repair technician damaged one of those cables. I don't know which one, but they declared the phone totaled. They gave me a new one, which, you know, isn't great for the environment, but okay, at least they owned up to their error. In 2020, my new iPhone 7 started to have this weird problem where it couldn't record audio. Sometimes it would freeze when I was trying to take a photo, which is, you know, a big part of why I have a smartphone in the first place. And of course, it was during the pandemic, so all the local repair shops near me were closed. The closest Apple store was 200 miles. They weren't letting people inside, but you could come drop off your device. I couldn't get time off work to drive out 200 miles and back on a weekday, go 2 weeks without my phone. So I had 6 calls with Apple support trying to get a loaner phone shipped to me so that I could mail my device in. And finally, they agreed to just send me a new phone. This example, it demonstrates basically all of the problems that we're trying to solve with the right to repair laws. There shouldn't be 26 disassembly steps to change the battery in a phone. Batteries are consumables. They need to be replaced. It shouldn't be so hard that even Apple's own techs break phones as they're trying to do that kind of repair. The Apple Store shouldn't be the only place doing these kinds of repairs, but in rural Arkansas, where I was living at the time, it was, in part because Apple limits access to parts, tools, and repair information. And Apple justifies these restrictions in part because they say there's copyright protected stuff in their hardware, which is frankly ridiculous. You're not violating copyright by changing a battery. So I'm hopeful. There's a lot of legislation in the works to try to fix all of these things. And the European Commission just voted in favor of user replaceable batteries. So if that's part of their legislative fix in the next couple of years, then things could look very different. I hope they do.
So I figured that after that story happened to you, that you went to iFixit. I was like, I'm working for you now, guys. So Anthony, what about you?
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. My name's Anthony Rosborough. I'm a PhD candidate in law here in European University Institute. But you know, broadly, I'm a right to repair advocate. And in 2021, I started an organization called the Canadian Repair Coalition. With similar goals to repair.org in the US, only with a kind of uniquely Canadian focusing on the challenges that repair poses in Canada specifically. In terms of my right to repair horror story, I am an avid motorcycle guy, and I'm an avid motorcycle mechanic in an amateur sense. And I have a very old BMW motorcycle. And about 2 years ago, there's a small part that needed to be replaced. It's made of plastic, and it's a tube, and it's shaped like an S. And the only way to get that part is if you have a BMW dealer nearby. And in Halifax, where I normally live, there's no BMW dealer. The nearest one, I believe, is Toronto or perhaps Montreal. And even then, it has to be ordered from the main plant in Germany, near Berlin. And the part itself, it's about a 2-inch plastic pipe, and the dealer charges something like $100 for it. And I was about to go on a big trip with a friend on motorcycles to rural Newfoundland. And we wanted to, we didn't have time to wait 6 weeks and pay $100. And so I had a friend 3D print an identical replacement tube that is now happily fixed into my motorcycle, and it works perfectly. So that is my right to repair horror story. I just refused to accept the terms from the manufacturer and come up with a solution of my own.
It was surprisingly uplifting. Yeah. I'm sure Dennis is listening like, yes, 3D printing?
Not just that, CNC machines, 3D printing. I think we got to make those resources very widely available across the nation in a city near you, so you can just, oh, you don't want to sell that to me? Fine, that's fine. I'll just go and make my own. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's nice. So before we dive into our subjects, and there's a lot of it, let's make our guests tinker a bit with a couple of questions of our very own signature icebreaker game called Hello World. So for a reminder, Hello World is a game we play with our guests to put them at ease, make them think we are in a light, fun, enjoyable show before we hammer the spirit with ethical dilemma. Spirits we hope they have an extended warranty for, because this is one thing we cannot easily fix. So, dear players, we're just going to ask you some very simple questions. And along with your answer, give us a quick explanation to justify it. No need to go into detail, just 5-10 seconds top to go on a rapid fire kind of stream of questioning. So I'll start. I'll ask Elizabeth and then Anthony, and then Dennis will have another question, and we'll go on like this. So I'm starting with my first question, which is very simple. How much % of the time is a repair just a reset? So Anthony.
how much percent of the time is the repair a reset?
Yes.
Well, in computerized devices, that is kind of often what really it is in terms of, diagnosing a problem through circumventing a software protection measure. It can often be a lot like resetting or, like a wipe. You would consider that on your computer. Often a repair can be done through just a simple software maneuver like that. But sometimes that's also prevented. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Elizabeth, do you agree? Is how much percent of the time is a repair just a reset?
We like to say that repair is hardware and refurbishment is software, so we distinguish between them. But it's true that a lot of problems can be solved with software resets, and honestly, software has its own huge set of repair challenges.
Perfect. Dennis?
Awesome. I got the next one. So what's the best tool? A hammer or a screwdriver? Anthony, why don't you kick us off?
Well, I mean, if we're talking electronics, then obviously the screwdriver. But
how much you have anger.
But you mentioned you did you re-roofed your house. You said, and in that case, I think the hammer is. So, often we think of repair in a very like electronics focused context, and I think there's good reason for that. But I think it's useful to think of repair as being also the hammer.
That's awesome. And Elizabeth?
Yeah, I've used a screwdriver like a hammer and a hammer like a screwdriver, so I think they're about equal.
All right, so next one for me, another very simple one. Has unplugging and plugging it back ever worked for you, or is it just a mystery and legend? Anthony?
It has, but it seems to be decreasingly working. And it seems to be a decreasing value in the modern world, but sometimes.
Elizabeth?
It worked for me this weekend, actually. We had a problem with our projector screen, and we took it apart, pulled out the connectors, put them back in, and it worked again.
It's a mystery.
You gotta love it when that works. That's the best solution. Okay, my next question. So what are you most proud of fixing by yourself? Anthony, do you have another story besides the motorbike? Because that's a great one. So if you can top that, that'd be amazing.
A washing machine, a front-loading washing machine. Actually, you know what? It was a dryer. It was a front-loading dryer. And it was one of these modern ones that I actually, felt quite intimidated by, because I always thought of home appliances as being analog, and they've recently become very digital. And yeah, I replaced a small capacitor that was required to produce the heat for the dryer. So it took a bit of diagnosis, but I did it.
Awesome. And Liz?
I'm actually proud of a washing machine repair too. I had a very very old washing machine, and the belt had failed, and I think it's the biggest part that I've ever worked with in a repair, pulling out the washing machine drum.
That's awesome. I actually have a washing machine story, and we'll get to that a little later. But it's cool to hear that we've all fixed one. So Gabrielle, when's your turn to fix a washing machine? You got to get on it.
It's a good question. I have a special power with washing machine. They never break when they're in my hand, I wish. So my next question for you, what is something you wish you could have fixed yourself? That's kind of a hopeful question. Anthony, something you wish you had fixed yourself?
That's a good question. Well, you know what? I got one for you. So in my volunteer time, I run a sailing school at a yacht club in Halifax, and we teach underprivileged kids how to sail. And in order to move boats around in the yard, we have a huge tractor that pushes boats around on cradles. And we had an issue where the engine stopped working, and this tractor was made by a company named John Deere, and it was unable to be fixed without an authorized dealer to come and to authorize our repair. And we had to do that. And I was, at the time, I was writing an article on this very problem, and it hurt me a lot to agree to make the expense.
And what about you, Liz?
Man, I've already told a story about trouble with my iPhone 7. But I also have an Apple Watch. I'm sort of locked into the Apple ecosystem, and the battery is declining on it. And similarly, I'm afraid of this repair. It starts with a blade. You have to cut open the adhesive, and I haven't done it yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll be inspired. But I'm nervous about that one.
So we're running out of time very quickly. Gabrielle, I know we had a couple more, but I think let's dive into the main stuff. And I'm seeing comments coming through. So really, thank you so much, Caitlin and Sam. We'll definitely bring up your comments in a couple of minutes here as we dive into the topics. Maybe we can, sure, why don't we kick this one off? So Caitlin's asking about automotive and engine computers. So they have data chips that you can easily pass to a new computer, and some modern cars require a whole new computer, so no chips and only can be programmed once. So what's your opinion on that? Is that wasteful, or is that, does it make sense for innovation and making sure that we keep progressing with all the automotive technology that we have these days, like self-driving and everything? What are your opinions?
Liz, did you want to go first?
I mean, I think wasteful, yes, is my short answer. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, wasteful. Although, you get into these discussions sometimes, and the argument you get in the other direction is something like, well, this modern computing where it's like modern onboard computing in terms of cars enables more efficiency, more fuel efficiency. It allows things to last longer, and so you have these kind of arguments in the reverse, saying that to not use these kind of modern computing design is actually more wasteful. Now, I'm not terribly convinced by that, because I think the ability to repair has kind of huge positive externalities that were often not included in that kind of argument. But that's something you sometimes hear in the opposite direction.
And Liz, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the whether or not there can be efficiency improvements by moving to new chips, the fact is that the majority of waste in all industries comes from mining and manufacturing, and requiring entirely new computers means a huge amount of that waste is not prevented.
So to build on that, actually, I have a bit of a story in terms of, I mentioned the washing machine. We actually picked it up off the curb. My girlfriend and I, we were driving through the neighborhood and we saw a really nice Samsung washing machine. We picked it up and took it home, ended up repairing it. And when we picked it up, the guy actually was there, the previous owner, and he let us know that, hey, this thing broke within like 3 years just after warranty. And when we brought it back, we fixed it up, we found the issue, ended up disassembling the entire thing, had to take the drum out, all the heavy parts. There was a front-end loading machine as well. And that in itself was an interesting adventure. But what I kind of want to allude to is later on, we ended up going and picking up one of these antique fridges from the 1950s. And this thing still works as if it's brand new. It's sitting in our basement right now. And so it gives an interesting parallel to kind of modern day appliances versus appliances that we had 70 years ago at this point. So we can't pretend that technology isn't capable of lasting for a very, very long time, especially with certain things like fridges and stoves. Those things haven't really changed all that much over decades in terms of functionality. Like, sure, there's a few extra buttons and features, but the core thing is it cooks your food or it stores your food for extended periods of time. Those are the things we really care about having it. So we have technology that can last decades and decades. Looking at Cuba is a prime example of being able to keep cars on the road for exceptionally long periods of time. And it's ingenious sometimes what they have to do, because getting parts is difficult, of course. Not only is it old vehicles that some parts aren't made anymore, so they have to kind of do some jerry-rigging, those types of things. But what I want to get to with this question for you and have a bit of a discussion around the table is, with all the technical innovation of the past few decades, how is it that we ended up here where some technology these days ends up falling apart within a couple of years, when we've had it in the past where it lasts for decades and decades and decades with minimal maintenance and just making sure you take good care of your equipment? What do you think?
Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, so I think it's often a conscious decision on the part of manufacturers to sort of incorporate a type of planned obsolescence. And one example that's often cited is light bulbs. And some of the earliest light bulbs would last literally hundreds of years. And in fact, I think there's one of them that's still operating. It's over 100 years old. It's a light bulb, and it was a conscious decision to make them as they are now. Although now they're compact fluorescent or they're LED or whatever. But the original incandescent bulbs were sort of intentionally designed to be put on the market on a wide scale to be limited in their lifespan to a certain duration. And so you can blame manufacturers for that, and I think it's wise to do that. But there's also an element that, to some extent, this is a consumer phenomenon too. Like, we want new, we want to replace, and so there's that element of consumer culture that kind of facilitates this quick obsolescence of products. And then finally, I think there's another dimension in all this, in that manufacturers now are increasingly removed geographically and culturally from consumers. So it's now the case that most of the things we buy and use are manufactured so far away from where we live and work that there's a kind of alienation of that middle ground where we would be able to interact with the manufacturer and get parts and information, where it's literally continents away.
It's
so
like
that
the
exacerbates
old-fashioned human contact that we lost.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah, and that removal geographically means that manufacturers are prioritizing things being less heavy. It's cheaper to ship things if they're lighter.
Right.
And so, in addition to consumer demand in some places for lighter things, manufacturers have a very real goal to make their stuff as light as possible to make it cheaper to ship. I think the worst example of planned obsolescence I've encountered recently is someone who had a microwave and was trying to change the light bulb in his microwave, and to get to the light bulb, to pull the light bulb out, he had 4 security Torx screws and a set of plastic clips. Which, I mean, it seems like a joke, right? How many Torx screws and plastic clips do you need to change a light bulb? Apparently 6.
It's just bad faith at this point. Another aspect of planned obsolescence is fashion and object going out of style. So I was wondering about the marketing side, using marketing to mess with consumer minds and manipulate them to buy the new device, car, thing. Here's the new iPhone, here's the new car, here's the new washing machine. Why not? So is it time that we regulate marketing more to minimize the amount of psychological manipulation happening that keeps people buying the newest thing, wanting the newest thing? Are there rules in place that help mitigate those practices in marketing especially?
I love that idea. I don't know of any.
So do you think it's something we should, a strategy we should have to regulate the right to repair, that also kind of cool it down with the marketing and try to be more real with the consumers?
Well, I mean, I think that approach you might call the stick, and what we've taken, the more common approach has been the carrot, which is, how do we have rules that incentivize manufacturers to have some sort of objective measurement of how repairable their products are, so that consumers can weigh those pros and cons. And I think, while I like the stick idea, I think it's probably more difficult to regulate from a government and lawmaking point of view than it is, a system of incentives. And when it comes to markets and sort of consumer welfare, I think incentives tend to work more easily within the market structure that we have. Now, I mean, if there's some way of using that stick, that I think that would be a great idea, but I think it'd be a tough sell.
Nice. And I'm sorry if my ongoing feud against the marketing department shows up in this question again, but in your opinion, is there such a thing as ethical marketing? Or even moral marketing?
No ethical consumption under capitalism, right? We're all implicated.
Right, exactly. I think we had a question from Keithlin, did we?
Yeah, Clinton had an interesting. He's touching base on the things we've kind of been discussing in terms of why do companies use glue, adhesive to glue electronics together instead of using screws. The way he's putting it, and I know Clinton, thanks for tuning in. Is it just to mess with you? Is it cheaper? What's the benefit to the company besides the obvious? Hey, you might run and go buy a new device.
I think part of it is that things can be smaller if they don't have to have screw connections. But I think a huge part of it has to also be planned obsolescence, because there are plenty of devices that that do use screws to secure batteries instead. And honestly, most consumers don't care about the difference of millimeters thicker phones, millimeters thicker laptops. So the argument they make is that it helps them make it thinner. It helps them make things more durable. But I think there has to be a planned obsolescence explanation too.
Yeah, honestly, the thinner argument is kind of moot. Honestly, I'd take a thicker device with a bigger battery that lasts longer any day over, just shaving off another 2 millimeters off the thickness in order to, you put a case on it anyways.
I think within the electronic sphere, though, there's a lot of competition among market players, and we don't necessarily care whether it's a millimeter or not thicker, but these are very tightly contested grounds among the big manufacturers, and they want the street credit to say that we make the thinnest phone or we have the most advanced whatever, and so we're left to kind of deal with the externalities of that, which is a phone that you can't repair, you can't remove the battery without literally destroying the screen, or what have you. So it's kind of we're sort of bearing the cost of hyper competitive environment over consumer electronics.
So I think we already touched on this, and we're going to switch the format a little bit, Gabrielle. Let's do our last section next, because I think we kind of had a great kind of kickoff into it, and that's something I think that's really important to discuss as we kind of move then to the transition, which would be the regulation kind of solutions. But the big thing is the mindset. So we've already kind of started talking about these things, and I feel it's such an important piece that kind of is at the core of a lot of these issues. What is the mindset that we kind of bring to it as consumers, as a society? There's so much talk about being good to the environment, and so many examples of greenwashing these days, focus on renewable materials. But at the core, if we're stuck in this perspective that we just want new things all the time, we kind of throw out this focus on just repairing and keeping what we have for as long as possible, then does not defeat the purpose of the whole environmental movement, at least to some extent. When we can and should create things that last, instead we focus on just replace everything from your fridges to your cell phones to your laptops to your tables, cars. It's kind of permeated into society as our culture to just buy and throw away.
Yeah, that brings me a question with a story of my own. Finally, where at the beginning of the year I was ready for a new machine, buying a new computer. It's been a while, so I've been running on the same since I think 2014, and I decided that 2022 would be the year where I started to put my money where my mouth is. So I purchased a framework laptop, the do-it-yourself editions, which is a completely repairable and updatable laptop. So I consciously decided to shift from one of the worst offender in terms of repairability. We talked about them earlier. I'm not saying the name. And now I voted with my money. So I went into framework. So that's what kind of what the mindset, the change of mindset you mentioned captures. So the fact that companies like Framework for a computer or Fairphone in Europe for cell phone, they start to pop up in the market and try to make their way into the consumer's home. Do you think that means the movement is gaining traction? Is the appearance of those companies a good sign for the right to repair movement, or is it just kind of a smoke screen? Is there something we don't know about those companies that could make us kind of, oh no, I didn't want to do that?
No, I love Framework. I have a Framework laptop too, and also did the DIY edition. And if I could do the same thing in a phone, I would. It comes with the one screwdriver you need to take it apart. Every component is labeled with both the name of what it is and a QR code. And if you pick up the QR code, it takes you to a guide for how to replace that part. There's no reason that all electronics can't be that way, and I'm hopeful that the appearance of Framework and Fairphone means that there is a market for this. People do want it.
Mm-hmm. There's even a QR code on the power cord. I found it so funny. And this is the screwdriver you talked about. If the people are curious, it's just a very small screwdriver with two head you can change like that, and it's really the only thing you need to repair or upgrade the computer. So yeah, I've been fangirling over framework for the beginning of January now. Anthony, what do you think? Is the fact that those companies starts to pop up a good sign for the right to repair? Do you see it with optimism, or is there something that kind of prevents you to be excited about it?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm fully support it, and I'm very happy to see it. I think if there's anything that I think we should not forget, it's that I think, not everyone is as interested in directly participating in repair as everyone else. So there is always going to be some subset of people who have no interest in repair. And I think the challenge for us as repair advocates is to articulate and to reaffirm that the right to repair is still in their interests, because it increases consumer choice, it reduces costs. And so I think beyond the product manufacturers that are giving us the direct ability to repair, to remind those who are not repair kind of inclined that the right to repair is not an obligation to repair. And merely because we all have the right doesn't mean that becomes your obligation. So I think, making sure that we articulate it as a right that is to all of our benefit, environmentally, socially, and economically, I think that's something we shouldn't forget.
I like the distinction you made between the right and the obligation. Like, if everything is repairable, doesn't mean I have to be a mechanic and know how to repair all my things, because if I'm not a handyman like Denis is, and I'm very, very, really not like him, I might be lost in an ecosystem where I have to repair everything and figure everything by myself, and I could be stressed out by this. So I like the fact that you're not obligated. The right doesn't mean you're obligated, and I think it's a fairly important distinction you just made. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So, like, for example, I don't know if for example, if you ask my 66-year-old mother, do you care about the right to repair, Mom? Do you want to fix your iPad? And she would say, I have absolutely no interest in this. I don't want to have anything to do with how this thing works. And I think that's a perfectly valid point of view, and so trying to find a way to articulate to someone in this sort of camp that the right to repair is still in their interests, I think is something we shouldn't leave behind.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about innovation. So in terms of that perspective, I'll play a bit of devil's advocate in saying, hey, to innovate and move fast, we need to kind of chuck the old and, move on to the new. What's your perspective on that? Is innovation stifled by taking into account the right to repair and looking at the longevity of devices for longer term? Or is there a way around it that integrates right to repair as part of the process and as part of the solution that allows innovation to thrive and have a greater potential to make an impact?
I think when you talk to people who do innovate technologically, almost all of them got their start by taking things apart, and they're really scared by a world where you can't take things apart. Scared by devices that are sealed and components that are integrated, so you can't separate them, can't see how they work individually. So I think having a more repairable, more modular world is really great from innovation from the ground up, and it gives people the opportunity to get inside their stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I would even go a bit further and say repair is a type of innovative practice, and maybe not in every single case, but if here's an example: the Linksys WRT504G router. It's an internet router. It's very characteristic. If you type in Linksys router, you'll probably find a picture of it. It's got this big blue plastic chunky design. And this was a thing. This was a router that was sold initially in the early 2000s for low cost, and it ended up in almost everyone's home. And some folks found out that the software that it was running was essentially open source, and so the manufacturer had to release the source code. And then it became an innovation platform. People turned it into like a robot with moving arms and wheels, and people learned. People developed a whole operating system built off of this wireless router. And so, I mean, okay, maybe that's not exactly repair, but the ability to access the core functionality of a device and to manipulate it and to also repair it enables this type of creative follow-on innovation that definitely repair is, I think, not only consistent with innovation, it is innovation in a way. And not every case, but I think it certainly can be the groundwork for innovation.
It's interesting. Annika actually brings an interesting point to it. Maybe, Valentin, we can throw that comment on screen, because she's talking about protecting intellectual property. And that's of course, always part of the piece of the puzzle, right, is making sure that The manufacturer protects their intellectual property so that they can, continue innovating and creating new products. And so, John Deere is a great example of a company that kind of claims this, and it would be an interesting discussion to talk a little bit about, the impacts of, protecting, but at the same time allowing your clients to do their own repairs, especially when it's time sensitive, as it can be for farming equipment. Where do you rest on that? What's your perspective on how much you can protect intellectual property while also at the same time keeping it not necessarily open source but accessible to clients?
I think protecting intellectual property is a smokescreen. I think that's what they say. Their reason for preventing repair is I don't think that's the reality. The reality is that, well, number one, dealerships make a huge portion of their income from repair, and limiting repair to John Deere dealerships keeps repairs happening there. And two, that they now collect a huge amount of data from their machines, and they use that data to sell more things, to shape their products so that they meet demands, which is sort of the positive way of framing it. And of course, the unfortunate side effect of that is that it means they prevent people from doing their own repairs.
Yeah, and I think this whole argument about protecting intellectual property, I mean, my response to it as an intellectual property lawyer is, well, what intellectual property are you protecting? And if it's in the case of John Deere's tractors, it's not copyright. And okay, if it's not a patent necessarily, it's not a trademark. And so what is it you're really protecting? And it's something like know-how. It's something like the ability to carry out a certain task, which is not really a protectable subject matter under any under any intellectual property regime. And so we're kind of through contract and through private sort of agreements, we're affording these new rights to manufacturers to control something that normally they would not be able to. And so, it's using intellectual property as a smokescreen, like Liz said, but also as a way of preventing competition in a market that's completely unrelated to what they do. So if you manufacture a tractor, and then you're preventing competition in a repair market, I mean, that's not your domain to prevent competition, and your intellectual property rights shouldn't give you the ability to reach that far, would be the argument. And so, yeah, I think there's a real question of an abusive use of intellectual property rights that stifles innovation and productivity in markets totally unrelated to what manufacturers do.
I was wondering, because we talked about the John Deere tractor and the farmers, and it brings me a question, because farmers are known to be able to repair their own thing. They knew since they were young, their father taught them, and it's just something they know. It's a knowledge that passed from father to son and even daughters sometimes. And now that we repair less and less thing, and we have things that breaks that we have to replace all the time, we may have lost this sense of passing knowledge to repair things. So now we have probably more than ever a population of person that doesn't really know how to repair their things. So I was wondering, do you think the basic repair skills should be taught in school?
Well, yeah. So I think repair is, to borrow some language from Aaron Perzanowski, who just authored a book called The Right to Repair. Repair is like a muscle that can atrophy over time when we forget how to do it culturally across huge groups of people. It's something that's in a kind of collective knowledge, and so teaching it in school would be great, but I mean, if we're going to be starting with iPads, we're not giving them the best opportunity to learn, right? So I think in a way we also need a world that is repairable in order to teach people how to repair. And so it's participatory in terms of the manufacturers and public as well. But I think that's one good reason why we need the right to repair from a social point of view, is that it allows us to decentralize knowledge and to share information. Like teaching someone else to repair something is a great way it's a very unique way of sharing information that isn't able to be shared in any other way. So it's an important way of communicating as a society. I know if you're familiar with the Mongol Rally, which is like a race across Europe into Mongolia, using like really old cars that are intended to break down, and the purpose of it is really to facilitate cultural exchanges with people who have nothing in common other than to repair, and so they can share and learn from each other. and just celebrate the art of repair without any other connection. And so, yeah, I think it's something we should celebrate as a society.
Nice.
iFixit's whole goal is to teach people to repair things. So absolutely, I think it's something that should be taught in schools, and it's something that we are teaching in schools. iFixit has an educational arm, and we partnered with universities internationally. I think there are a couple in Canada, many in the US, and we're hoping to expand even further internationally. Working with students in technical writing classes to learn to repair things. So we send them a toolkit and a device that hasn't yet been documented on iFixit, and they create a set of repair guides for it. And that educational program in the last year we've begun to expand to kindergarten through 12th grade schools as well. So absolutely, I think it should be taught in schools, and we're working towards that.
We talked about the education of the right to repair. We talked about the obligation versus the right. I think ultimately we should talk about the empowerment to repair. Even if it's not yourself, you can have someone nearby you that can do it for yourself, or you can teach each other and just share knowledge like that. So empowerment to repair is also very, very important, and a core value, I think, that lives within the right to repair movement.
And Anthony, and I know when we spoke earlier too, you mentioned how important it is in the sense of empowering remote communities too, right? Because they don't necessarily have access to all the parts as easy, all the tools as easy, and in your own personal example too, right? You couldn't get that piece for your motorcycle, so it
because
can make a huge impact.
So remote.
Yeah, and I think as Canadians who live fairly close to the border with populated regions, we get accustomed to this idea that repair is is an option, and I think if the further you go and you really see the remote parts of Canada, you see that repair is a necessity, and it's but yet the means to do it are becoming increasingly limited, and particularly in Canada's northern and Indigenous communities, that repair can mean keeping important infrastructure online. It can mean teaching each other how to perform the repairs. It can mean sharing knowledge. It can be a really important way of kind of providing an independence and I mean, without using too strong of a word, a type of self-determination that I think repair should be part of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a recent Consumer Reports study that was examining attitudes about repair, and marginalized communities are, broadly speaking, more supportive of, more interested in repair. And I think a big part of that is, the empowerment aspect, being able to take control of your own things, being able to fix them yourself.
So as we kind of are, time's flying by and so fast, and there's so many questions I still want to talk about, but I wanted to make sure we save some time at the end to talk about rights and regulations. I think that's a very important piece, because it shows where we're kind of going, the steps we can take to push our governments to make the right decisions where regulation is necessary, and where we have to change our own mindset, of course, as we've already talked. But I would love to hear from you. What's your perspective on regulation these days, especially when we're talking about the different countries across the world? Which countries do you see leading the charge in terms of right to repair, and what can we learn from them and adapt to the North American market, to Canada, to North America, to not just give the carrot or the stick to the manufacturer, but also to help society to change their perspective on these things, as we've discussed, and to move the movement forward, and then make the impacts that we really want to see.
Liz, do you want to start on that, or I'm happy to?
You take it away.
So, I mean, I guess you could say that there's been a lot of progress in Europe. But I think there's limited kind of instruction that we can take from that. So Europe passed the Eco Design Directive, new regulations in 2019, which imposed a new series of obligations on manufacturers to provide parts, tools, and information for specific product categories. So things like home appliances and consumer electronics, and then some really oddball product categories like welding equipment, and some others. So I mean, they sort of handpicked a group of specific products that these obligations will apply to. And in addition to that, some member states in the EU, most notably France, has introduced a repairability index. So a way, like I mentioned earlier, of using the carrot. So manufacturers having to display, on the product at the time of sale, how repairable it is on a scale of 1 to 10. And that's seen like an enormous amount of success and take up. And people have been inspired by that. And jurisdictions in the US have been looking to implement it there. And I think in Canada, we were starting to flirt with the idea of incorporating it in Canada as well. And so there's been enormously influential. But I think that, ultimately right to repair in terms of how it's implemented in a given jurisdiction will always come down to kind of unique considerations for that jurisdiction. And so it's not sort of a copy and paste situation. It's a bit more of a trace and outline. Yeah.
And at the same time, although absolutely you're right, it's not copy and paste. And I know Canada is seeking fixes to copyright law that are similar to, but not identical to, the U.S. fixes to copyright law. But at the same time, I think legislation anywhere can sort of raise all the boats.
Yeah.
And I think the French law is a great example of this, in that as manufacturers have been given points in the French system by providing repair information, they have begun doing that in ways that they were not before. And there are many companies that had not yet released repair manuals for anything that now have them available in French on their websites for the sake of getting points on the French repairability system. So I'm hopeful that as so many different countries are considering legislation, that we'll all see benefit from that.
Fantastic. So go ahead, Denis.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's amazing to see, because it is, as we say, it takes a village, and in this case, it very much is gonna help us all by all of us slowly chipping away at this, because these days the global world, manufacturers sell all across the world. So if they're doing it in one place, it's easier to implement in the next place. That's great to see. It's a fantastic story.
So I'm seeing time flying by, and I have a very last serious question I wanted to get into before we go for the final wrap up and our final game. So when I'm not hosting a web show, I work with a social and responsible innovation lab called Infieri. And of course, they were really compelled about the right to repair episode. So they had a question to pass on. So the Infieri's focus is in the health sector. So that might be a tricky and kind of a niche question, but let's try it anyway. So that was from my colleague Robson, who'd like to better understand the current state of the right to repair discussion, but for medical devices. If you know something about it, I'd be curious if iFixit have a manual to repair their own medical device. Like it could be, especially for those used by home users, so the glucose monitor or thing like that. So both from a technological complexity to make this repair and from a regulatory perspective to ensure safe use of these devices by user. Do you know what the medical kind of light is on the right to repair?
Yeah, so iFixit is, as of 2020, the largest collection of medical device repair manuals. We started the initiative during the pandemic when we heard that a lot of hospital technicians were not able to fix their ventilators because there was so much demand for parts and tools and information, and there weren't enough techs to go around, and so hospitals were having to fix their own equipment. And we saw an opportunity to help by sourcing those manuals, getting them and putting them online. So we still have that large collection of manuals. I know that there have been a number of pushes toward a legislative fix for medical devices in the U.S., and so far none have been successful. There's a lot of lobbying by AdvaMed to push against that. There was a bill in California last year that didn't get very far, unfortunately. But I'm still hopeful. Still hopeful.
Yes, and Anthony, do you know something about the legislation side for the right to repair for medical devices for user? Is it something that's tricky in a legal sense?
Well, I think it shows us, and like the examples that I mentioned in Europe that have been kind of influential elsewhere are really consumer law driven. They're from the analysis of what is fair for consumers. And I think the case of medical equipment and the kind of lack of legal development we've seen there shows us that when we don't have a consumer basis for this change, it's harder to deal with. And that's particularly because we're dealing mostly with intellectual property rights and competition law. Mm-hmm. And this is where the kind of rubber hits the road in terms of really deep, meaningful right to repair reforms. There's a lot of lobbying, particularly in the United States, against it. It's kind of the trickier end of the deal is when we have products that are sometimes niche, expensive, and not widely distributed to consumers.
Well, thank you for answering. My lab would be super happy.
And Downton, as we wrap up here and change gears to our Goodbye Cruel World game, I wanted to give a shout out to Sam as well, who left us a very interesting comment and talking about right to repair horror stories taking on a new form of cyberpunk dystopia when, bionic eyes give eyesight to people, but, these devices can go obsolete. So it's kind of, I wanted to wrap up on this one, as we look to the future and think about right to repair and the way we're developing our medical technologies and the future potential of these technologies too, right? It's something we have to keep in mind. It's not just it's not good. These devices are getting more and more integrated with our everyday lives, and they make a huge impact on us. So I think we all as a society need to think long and hard about how we treat these devices, especially when they start to make an impact on us in the medical sense too.
I can imagine a world where I have bionic eyes and then the company that make those eyes went bankrupt and I can't see anymore because the company is bankrupt. That's pretty bleak. No more updates on my eyes.
I think that sets the tone nicely for our Goodbye Cruel World.
Absolutely.
So as I mentioned, it's our favorite game because it's the antithesis to our opening game, Hello World. So while the opening game was very easy breezy with fun questions, this one's going to be a doozy. So we're gonna make some controversial statements and ask some impossible questions. And as we're running out of time, you only have a brief moment to react to each one. So are you ready to rumble?
So I'm going to start, if you agree. So my first question, tricky question, is there something people should always be forbidden to repair themselves?
Don't answer too fast.
Yeah, we're still running out of time.
My short answer is no.
Perfect. That's perfect. So why is there they should be able to repair everything?
I think that there's no special sauce to becoming a technician. You become a technician by digging into your stuff, by learning about it, by reading about it, and as long as all the parts, tools, and information are available, there isn't anything that I think people shouldn't be able to repair themselves.
But is there something that could be too dangerous to repair, so they should not touch it, or everything should be like user friendly, so everything can be repaired?
I mean, as long as you know what you're doing, then, and I don't, right? There are plenty of things that I would not personally repair.
I would personally like to know the answer from a lawyer. Should everyone be able to repair their stuff, or is it a lawsuit coming?
Well, a lawyer would say there's always insurance, but no, but in reality, I think there's different levels of risk, and so of course, if you have a fertilizer plant or a nuclear power plant, you shouldn't have anyone going in there seeing if they can fix it. So I mean, of course, there's degrees to which the right to repair maybe should be more concentrated among fewer people, but no, broadly, I think the range of those things is very, very small, and for the most part, all of us should have the courage to, if you have an older car, open it up and figure out how it works, and replace an alternator or a fan belt, and empower yourself and learn the process. So for the most part, no, I don't think we should draw too many lines.
Perfect.
Awesome. Next one's a tricky one, particularly. So as part of the free world, which is a very, very important topic these days, companies deserve to decide themselves whether they want to allow repairs or not. And consumers should vote with their dollars to support companies that align with their values. Thoughts?
I think you have to make a better shock.
You can see the gears turning, though.
Yeah. Oh man. I think ultimately, Sure. Companies can do what they want as long as there isn't legislation requiring them to do otherwise, and that is the world we live in. But unfortunately, that kind of limitation to repair causes a lot of problems for individual consumers, and it ends up creating these repair monopolies where companies can sort of run away with repair and set whatever prices they want, limit repairs from independent providers, and as consumers, we should be mad about that, whether or not it's free world, free market, acceptable. It creates a lot of problems for people.
So I have a response to that. And okay, if we're going to go with free market, let the market decide. Then let's say to manufacturers, okay, then do away with all of your intellectual property rights because they're anti-competitive, and let the market decide. If you can't compete without your exclusive rights that are given to you by law, and let the market decide, then sure, okay, no problem. So I guess to me, it would only work if we were consistent. If we're going to let the market decide, then let's do away with IP.
Love it.
I'm taking notes.
Gabrielle, I believe you have another question for us.
Yeah. When is it, in your opinion, when is it okay to buy new versus repairing? When should we give up the reparation? Like, nah, I'm buying.
I mean, there's a subjective component to this. I mean, I think we've all been, any of us who have, attempted repairs on certain things that have just driven you insane, and there's no, you sort of hit a wall where you're like, I'm done with this. And I think that's excusable as long as you tried, you did your best. And like there's an organization called Fix-It Clinic, and they do these online remote Fix-It clinics, and they teach people how to fix things online. And they're very understanding of this as well. Like, you might break it in the process, you might fail, but the point is that you tried.
I'm on my third iPhone 7. There will not be a fourth iPhone 7.
Well, fantastic. And that's it already. So this will conclude our 5th episode of BandWit. We hope you enjoyed it. Elizabeth or Anthony, anything you'd like to let our viewers know, or anything to promote before leaving? Elizabeth, I'll let you go first.
Sure. Yeah. So we're hugely supportive of the repair.org, which is the repair coalition. If you are in the U.S., there are individual sites through repair.org that will take you to emailing and calling your legislators directly. I encourage you to please go and tell them how much right to repair matters to you. It very much does matter to them to hear from their constituents about it.
Fantastic. And Anthony, what about you? Something you'd like to promote or say for a final word?
Yeah, so I mean, people in Canada who are really interested in repair, I would say, first of all, go to canrepair.ca, join the mailing list. Secondly, find your local tool library and repair cafe, and there's tons of them across the country, and support them. Join your local tool library. Just signing up and seeing what you can fix yourself is really the most important thing. So take repair into your own hands is my suggestion.
A reason for you to come to Montreal is there's a motorcycle repair cafe that opened downtown. So you should come by and see that as a motorcyclist yourself. So fantastic. Thank you very much for your time and knowledge. It's been a real pleasure.
Anthony, Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.